I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis and Hashimoto thyroiditis, and I've seen so many cases of inflammatory bowel disease being helped.
Maybe we can talk about biophotons in sort of like a cancer state and how that's affecting things like apoptosis and things like that briefly.
And I find that like modern medicine nowadays, like they're really focusing on biochemistry, but quantum biology, it still emphasizes bioenergetics. It really emphasizes information too. So like how would these non-physical elements actually come in and then play into things like health and healing?
What you said is spot on, and I think
Dr. Catherine Clinton, welcome to Holistic Dynasty. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. You are definitely one of the most, I think, inspirational people in the quantum health space. You've definitely brought a lot of free education to the platform like Instagram around areas like water, structured water, and mitochondrial health, as well as fascia, which we're going to be getting to in a minute. But for listeners that are new, you've described the body as this interconnected web of energy, biology, and also sort of our innate environment. So I'd love if you could share sort of what you mean by those things and why it's such a vital shift from the very predominant conventional medical view of the body in systems in sort of this reductionist manner.
yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you guys for having me on. I'm really excited to talk with you about all my favorite topics. But I think this is a great place to start because we've all learned, and this is what has been taught in medical schools, being utilized in doctor offices around the world, this idea of the body as a machine. We are different parts, parts break, you can replace them, you can use pharmaceuticals or supplements to kind of push them back into working order. And we know that that's true, and that has brought us so many different medical interventions and miracles, you might say, but it only goes so far. If you look at the body, we are trillions and trillions of cells, and each one of those cells is completing hundreds of thousands of tasks, millions of tasks each second. Mathematically, that's impossible with this current idea of random collision, where we have a biomolecule, it's randomly colliding and bumping around the cell till it finds its receptor match, unlocks, and action happens. That's where quantum biology comes in. This idea of resonance and coherence in the body. It's like I can send you guys a letter in the traditional mail, right? I can send it through my post office and you guys will get that communication. But it's slow. It takes time. It can get lost. I can make mistakes with the address. Whereas if I want to send you a message right now, I can use text or email. I can use these unseen waves of information. And our body is this structure that holds different liquid crystalline structures within it. And if you look at our environment, yes, there's matter. I'm sitting here on a chair, I'm drinking something, right? Chemical, mechanical view is all around us. But there's also this world of unseen waves of energy and information. And I can send you a message using those waves, and it's much faster and efficient. And that's what's happening in our body as well. There are these waves of energy and information in our environment, from light, from sound, from fields of energy, electrical fields, magnetic fields, scalar waves, electromagnetic waves, our thoughts and emotions. All of these things interact with different structures in the body, our DNA, our cell membranes, our fascia, and the water that lines them. And when they interact with these waves of energy and information, they act as transducers and they change that energy and information into biological action. There's measurable biological response. And it's absolutely incredible to expand our understanding of the body to a version where we see that resonance matters, coherence matters. And we can get into some of the science around this because it's really exciting to see that our body communicates not only with the outside environment, but internally it communicates with vibration, with electromagnetic fields, with resonance. It's really, really vital expansion of our understanding and our toolkit of how we approach health and healing.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. And I think if anything, kind of society moving more toward like this digitalized society, a society of convenience where we're obviously cooped up in our homes all day. And just all of kind of like these adaptations of modernity, I think it's a big contributor to why the chronic illness percentage in the United States has almost risen to around, what is it, 75% now? So, what would you say, like in terms of quantum biology, like how can it help us better understand why we do have like this really bad chronic disease epidemic in the United States and in other countries as well? And how does that help us understand like the origins of these chronic illnesses better than conventional models would?
That's a great question. I think that it's the missing piece in our understanding, right? How many times do we hear the story, and I see this with patients all the time? I am exercising right, I am eating the right things, and I am sicker than ever. And they're missing this understanding of how light impacts our body, how our connection with the natural world, right? There's this universal flow of energy happening at all times. And we are meant to be embedded in that energy. But we are sequestered away in our houses and our cubicles with these massive obstacles to this energy flow. And that's what quantum biology offers. It offers an understanding that simple steps can be taken so that we can return to these relationships. We can embed ourselves in this tapestry of energy that our body has lived with. You know, humans have lived this way for millennia, and modern life has done an incredible job of putting obstacle after obstacle in way of this flow of energy that's so vital for everything. Hormones, our immune system, our inflammatory balance, our metabolism, our cardiovascular health, our digestive health. I mean, on and on and on. It depends on this flow of energy. It's really this C, this energy first, matter second. And I think what we're so used to understanding health with, treating health with, is matter first. And we don't acknowledge that energetic blueprint that's all around us. And when we do that, it just makes all the more for all those efforts that we're putting in. All of a sudden, the diet clicks into place. All of a sudden, the exercise makes a difference, right? And so I think it's really that missing piece in our understanding of the chronic disease epidemic that we're in. That it's not just chemical and mechanical. Yes, that plays a part, absolutely, but there's an expanded understanding that a lot of us are missing and overlooking. And it's exciting to be able to pull that into our understanding and our approach because it has a dramatic effect.
Yeah, that was put really beautifully, and it really sort of harkens back to me about this idea of if you can't see it, I don't believe it. And I think a lot of times in medicine, or when you are a patient like me or Chris have or whoever, you sort of begin to psychoanalyze all the things that you're hearing, and there's all this free information online. And I think what we've seen specifically over the last probably 10 years, with the higher advent of information and people sort of moving to more alternative lenses of things, is we still tend to move towards the new shiny object because of our innate programming of convenience that Chris was mentioning earlier, of sort of, oh, we're this advanced species on this planet. There has to be a more complicated answer to our problems than just get natural light, eat real food within season, touch the earth, have good community and relationships. And I think that often get lost in buzzwords, and because of sort of the capitalist nature of our society, gets lost in marketing as well, because it's not, easy to sell sunlight per se. And I actually find it quite perplexing that, as someone that's been through this myself, some people are more apt to go buy a program on whatever that might be just one singular component of their problem, then look at the big picture and then hone in. And so you mentioned the word coherence quite a lot. I do as well. I think it's a great word. I think oftentimes it's maybe a little bit too surface level, but it's sort of hard to get around that to a deeper meaning. But when you speak about coherence and communication within the body, which is something you alluded to in our first question, I'd love to hear maybe your definition of what coherence means from a quantum perspective and why that's so critical. Because I think coherence encompasses all the things that we may not see with our six senses or feel with our six senses or taste. And I think that's an important part to the puzzle.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a really important part. And, you know, we can get really technical and talk about quantum coherence being this vibrational background that allows for quantum mechanics to happen. Certain events like quantum tunneling or quantum entanglement or superposition, taking multiple paths. But zooming out from a bigger perspective, I like to describe it as two or more things working as one. You know, two people dancing the tango, or multiple individual molecules of water forming a wave that travels the ocean. How does that happen? An orchestra, right? We have all these different instruments. They're all playing this beautiful song. What's happening there? There's a conductor. Coherence is that conductor. It is the ability, and you know, this could take us really off in left field, and we could start talking about what is consciousness, what is life, what does it all mean? Because in coherence, and this is what really um, tipped the scales for me when I was sick and looking at the early research in the early 2000s. They were looking at quantum coherence in photosynthetic bacteria. And they were looking at how a photon of light gets to the photoreactive center. And they found all these incredible things, right? There's quantum mechanics at play, there's tunneling, there's entanglement, superposition. But what really excited me was this idea of quantum coherence, that the proteins in that bacterium were all working together to keep that photon of light on its fastest path. To me, what I saw in that was an intelligence that wasn't brought up by the individual, that it was this being embedded in the tapestry of life, that what does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to be consciousness? That there is a connection to something greater, an intelligence. And so, you know, you can stop me because I love talking about this. But I think from a simple perspective, it's two or more things working as one, and coherence is that guiding force. And it's incredibly important when we're talking about how the body works, how relationship works, how our global society works. Coherence is that piece that allows things to work seamlessly.
Yeah, so now that we're in like this position in 2026 and there's 5G towers everywhere, everybody's inside all the time, nobody's connected with other human beings. Would you say that that's all made like just very catastrophic impacts on our cellular coherence and all that sort of stuff? And if so, like what would be some of the downstream health effects that we might notice from that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are a lot of things brought up there, right? We're talking about the electromagnetic presence of some of the different Wi-Fi around us. A lot of the research that was coming out before was about power lines, radio, right? Wi-Fi is a whole nother level. And this separation that is all pervasive in our society. I mean, how many times do we go in a restaurant to see a family and everybody's looking at a screen, right? My daughter and I went to an event and she said, well, nobody was there. And I said, wait, everybody was there. And she said, no, they were all on their screens. I just had one person to play with, right? It is this, it's this incredibly addictive relationship with the screen, this narcissistic relationship where it's very deceptive. It's It's a false presentation that we get wrapped into. And that division that we have happens within ourselves as well, right? So we're not only becoming divided from our loved ones and our family and our community, but our own selves, right? I talk to people all the time that have no stillness, they have no silence in their day-to-day life. And what is that doing to their immune system, their nervous system? It's creating this dysregulation that just ripples through the body. And we can see that in so many different areas. We can see that in immune situations, autoimmunity, inflammatory conditions of all kinds, right? Inflammation kind of is the backbone of so many different chronic diseases. We can see that in our cellular energy. I mean, our thoughts and emotions have such a primary force on the mitochondrial production of ATP, our cellular energy, our scaffolding of proteins in the body, right? Because ATP isn't just energy, it plays many roles. So, I mean, how long do we have to talk about what
Yeah.
this division is doing, right? It's,
Oh, it's crazy, yeah. And when you were saying that, I was thinking, I'm like, oh, POTS, MCAS, dysautonomia, that whole cluster can be impacted by those sorts of things.
yeah, yeah,
And I find that like modern medicine nowadays, like they're really focusing on biochemistry, but quantum biology, it still emphasizes bioenergetics and it like really emphasizes information too. So like how would these non-physical elements actually come in and then play into things like health and healing? So like I'll throw out some examples like biophotons, biofields, electromagnetic signaling. Like how do those all go in and kind of like promote health in the system?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. What you said is spot on, and I think those conditions you brought up, like mast cells. I think of them; they really are the coherence leaders in the body, right? When coherence drops, they dysfunction, and then we see all these things that we see that are rampant right now. And so, when we're talking about biophotons, when we're talking about electromagnetic fields, I mean, something we need to recognize, because when we talk about the deleterious effects of non natural electromagnetic fields, then people get the idea of like, oh, all electromagnetic fields are bad. But that's not true, right? Every single cell, every atom in our body, every cell is creating its own unique electromagnetic field. And that field, we see this from research, and we see it from several different researchers. One of the most prominent is Michael Levin out of Tufts University. And he's doing research, and he's shown, and others have validated, that the electromagnetic field of a cell is what dictates its behavior, its movement, differentiation. That's huge. How a stem cell becomes an ear or an elbow. That's dictated by the information that's held in that electromagnetic field. And we see this all the way down to our microbiome. I mean, when we talk about biophotons, for me, that's a really exciting field of research. Last year, I founded I guess it was the year before. So 2 years ago, I founded the Quantum Biology Health Institute, and we just got done with a research study on heart coherence and mitochondrial function. And next, I hope that we start to look at this light communication in the body, because there are light receptors in the body for ultraviolet light where ultraviolet light cannot penetrate externally from the sun. But biophotons are this light emission that is emitted from our mitochondrial, from our metabolic processes, from our DNA, and it has a communication role in the body. There was a study just last year, just recently, where they took two petri dishes of mitochondria, and they took two different petri dishes and they put them close together, but they were separated, they were not touching, and they put antimyosin in one petri dish, and that stressed those mitochondria out, and they created a really high level of biophoton emission. So when you're looking at biophoton emission, and this is the work of Alex Gershwich and Albert Fritz Albert Popp, and people are continuing this research today. But biophoton emission has been found to be not just random light emission, but it's coherent, acting as communication. And so they have these two petri dishes of mitochondria. One becomes really stressed out and it creates really high emissions of biophotons. And that coherent communication level of biophoton emission, it's this Goldilocks zone. So really high biophoton emission is associated with stress. It's kind of like an SOS signal, I'm really stressed out, I need this. Really low biophoton emission is associated with a cell that's dying, very dysfunctional, right? Like the light is sort of leaving. And so it's that Goldilocks zone where our healthy cells are, or we want them to be. And so they had this petri dish of mitochondria that were emitting really high biophotons, and the petri dish next to them changed their biophoton emission in response. When they put an opaque barrier between the two petri dishes, that communication stopped. So that first dish was still stressed. They stressed that dish with the antimyosin, but the second dish didn't respond. There was no communication happening. And so we see that biophotons, part of the spectrum they're emitting is in that ultraviolet spectrum. And we have light sensitive proteins in areas where external ultraviolet light can't penetrate. So I think, and I hope that we're on the cusp of starting to understand this light communication in the body. I mean, there's so many different things that opens up for research, for discovery, and hopefully application for our health.
I'm so glad you brought up that study because that's literally what I was thinking as you started beginning to talk about biophotons. And I think, was it that same study that they like poured hydrogen peroxide on one culture and then the other culture like reacted to the one being in distress? Is that the same exact research study? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty profound. And there's a lot of research. I know Sabine Hazen, who's a gastroenterologist, has been looking at things like long-term viral illness and things like bifidobacteria strains. And one of the things they found that was infrared and red light stimulation can actually proliferate bifidobacteria, which is often depressed in people that end up getting things like long COVID or other things. And I'm sure would be found in almost anyone with like MCAS would be like disproportionate amounts of bifidolactobacillus and other strains. And so it really brings forward this idea of how important light is, not just externally working on the internal system, but internally working on the internal system. And one of the most profound things that I found that I'd love your take on briefly before we kind of talk about external light and its input to the system and its coherence is the biophoton emissions in cancer cells compared to a healthy cell. Because I think, and you can corroborate this with me or fix what I'm about to say, but I believe like in a cancer cell, they find that there's a lot of like almost off-gassing of biophoton emissions and sort of this erratic rhythm. And when you look at sort of a healthy cell's biophoton emission, it has these rhythms with it that are associated with it. And it's still like pretty new as far as like our understanding. Like even though they've been researching it for a long time. I know you mentioned Fritz Albert Popp earlier, but it's still like a pretty new area of interest where we're really taking it seriously. But maybe we can talk about biophotons in sort of like a cancer state and how that's affecting things like apoptosis and things like that briefly. Because it's sort of the most
Yeah.
extreme example.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that it goes back to that understanding of that Goldilocks zone, right? Just like you said, there's that coherence, pulsing, that middle ground of biophoton emission that seems to be associated with healthy cellular communication. And then that cancerous emission that you brought up, very erratic, very bright. To me, I think of like an SOS signal. Like they're just like, hey, hey, hey. And if our body, so this kind of piggybacks or extends into the research of like Irina Kosick and the resonance recognition model. Our cells, she's found that our proteins, our enzymes, they are communicating with different light frequencies and different electromagnetic frequencies. So she brings it into the terahertz and many different frequencies. But if we can start to understand this, it brings in so many different avenues. It brings in an understanding of how we can use non-invasive ways to help. You mentioned like red and infrared light increasing bifidobacterium, which is any decrease of that is associated just simply with inflammation, right? We see that in autoimmune conditions. We see that in immune dysregulation. But it also opens up this understanding of this instantaneous communication that we have in the body. And it brings in psychoneuroimmunology into a whole new field where we're not just talking about influencing the immune system, the endocrine system, the gut, the brain axis with chemicals, whether that be, endogenous chemicals, our cytokines, our neurotransmitters, our hormones, something we take, a supplement, a pharmaceutical, a hormone, steroids, but this light emission in the body and how we can influence that with our thoughts and emotions. So I think it's an incredibly exciting understanding that light is a communication network in the body. I mean, when we talk about the microbiome, this is one area that I'm really excited about because we see microbes also communicating with light. I mean, they're communicating with sound, electromagnetic frequency, right? They're doing all these things. But those enterocytes that line the gut are filled with mitochondria. And there seems to be this triad happening. And the proteins in the gut, there's so many light sensitive proteins. So, I mean, why would we have this hardware continuing to be produced generation after generation if there wasn't some use for these light sensitive proteins in places where the only light is coming from biophoton emission, right? And of the ultraviolet spectrum. And so it opens up a whole new understanding, and one that's faster and really efficient. And it takes us away from a solely chemical mechanical model into one where, it once we open that door, so many things are possible. These light spectrums and influencing biophoton emission just with our thoughts then I start to think, yeah, you guys might have to like stop me because I get so excited about this, but like our hands are the biggest emitters of biophoton emission, and we think about healing touch, reiki, distant healing. I mean, it's just absolutely really exciting area of research that I'm really excited and hopeful about.
I am too. It really makes me wonder about a sort of parallel Spider-Verse where instead of Rockefeller medicine in the early 20th century, we shift to like continuing the heliotherapy model of medicine used in like late World War I and beyond, and helping kids with tuberculosis. There's a great book for anyone that wants an introductory read to light as therapy called The Healing Power of the Sun. That's very easy. You could read it in a day or two. But this just made me think of also the work of photobiologist and time-lapse photographer John Ott, who wrote a really great book, Health and Light. And that was sort of like one of the first books that I read where he's explaining taking these time-lapse photography photos of an apple for a Walt Disney film, and he had to sort of cage off the apple tree. And for some reason, the artificial light he's using to get a good shot of the apple, the apple never ripens properly. And then he looks outside of the canvas he's built around this apple, and like all these other apples are turning red. This one's still green. And this leads him down this rabbit hole of like, well, how can light also affect the maturing of mammals? And so he found that you could actually alter things like puberty in certain mammals with just altering the light spectrum, and began all these sort of experiments that unfortunately I feel like just got kicked to the curb in like the early 70s as certain other things came to the advent. So that sort of begs the question, like external light, when we think of it, how does light from the sun as a therapeutic source of light really reflect our internal influence of quantum biological processes in the body, going beyond like the probably the obvious of like the circadian biology principles of like light hitting your retina in the morning, stimulating melanopsin, sending that to the SCN, and then waking up all the peripheral clocks. What else is going on throughout the day that we might be less aware of?
I mean, what isn't it doing? I mean, it is setting up that foundation, right? It's cueing our hormones, our immune system, our inflammatory balance. And I think one of the things that, you know, you guys, obviously, and I'm sure your audience is aware of that circadian biology and aware of how it set up our neurotransmitters and our mood, our inflammatory state, our metabolism, all these different things. But I think there's still this aspect of understanding where it's extraction based. Right? When I talk to somebody that's just learning this, they're saying, okay, well, how much time outside do I need? I'm like, how much time do I need to extract the benefits of the sun? And for me, I think one of the missing pieces and one of the most exciting pieces for me about quantum biology is this interconnection that you start to understand. When you reduce it down to the level we're talking about, when we're talking about a photon of light and quantum coherence, what you start to see is that even though you're at the smallest pieces that we yet know of, it's not reduced into a box. It all of a sudden blends into this tapestry where you see we don't end at the barriers of our skin. So, one of the exciting things for me is when that person is asking, okay, how much time do I need? And what time do I need? What's the most important time for me to be outside? And how long? And da da da. I just sort of giggle inside. I have a certain amount of glee because I know that this is an invitation for them to cultivate a relationship with the world around them. And the patients that I see are predominantly autoimmune patients. And just because of my own history with that. And I have yet to see a patient that didn't have a deep lack of safety or a lack of a sense of belonging. And I can tell them all about how nature is, the ground beneath our feet will always hold us. But for them to experience safety in that relationship, for them to cultivate that themselves, for them to feel a sense of safety and belonging with the rising of the sun, I think that there is a level of coherence there happening in our biology that we can talk about psychologically like we are now, but I think something else is happening. I think that when we do that, we are embedded in this flow of energy. And that's where we evolved. For millennia, the rising and setting of the sun has been so important. And a lot of people now are starting to understand kind of the biochemistry of that impacting our hormones, metabolism, and inflammatory state. But I think the exciting thing is when everybody starts to understand the energetics and the relationship aspect of it, because it's not only is it giving us that sense of belonging and safety, which our modern day nervous system is desperate for, it also reminds us of this reciprocal relationship we are in with the world we live on, that we have to start taking care of the world that we live on because it is an extension of us and we are of it. And so I'm not sure if that was the answer you were looking for, but
That
that's
was
where I get
amazing. Yeah. Yeah.
excited about quantum
Yeah.
biology is like the interconnection. We're all connected. And
Yeah.
imagine how our geopolitical landscape would shift if there was some recognition of how interconnected we all are just as humans. I mean, it's something we need to start cultivating.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is so well said. I know that, yeah, you mentioned that you had like an autoimmune disease before you found all of this, and I was the classic case of like the worst T helper cell 2 dominance ever. Like 40 plus life-threatening food allergies, severe asthma, severe eczema, you name it pretty much. So I wanted to ask, like, have you had any specific like clinical examples or case studies where you've come across like the fruits of your own labors just working with somebody on these like circadian quantum principles, and you've just seen like a really beautiful thing come out of it? Because I know for me, like when I started out in my journey, I was in a really bad spot. I was vomiting stomach acid pretty much every time I ate something. And within 3 to 6 months, probably, I turned my entire life around. And within a year, asthma gone, eczema gone forever. Within 2 years, 35 allergies gone. So I wanted to ask, like, what are some of like the fruits and the beautiful case studies that you've had with some of your own clients and patients?
Yeah, absolutely. So many. I mean, I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis and Hashimoto thyroiditis, and I've seen so many cases of inflammatory bowel disease being helped. Similar story as yourself, that 3 to 6 months, then a year, just a profound shift in inflammation because of that change in circadian biology. Um, I mean, I have so many as psoriasis, eczema, um, all those autoimmune conditions, rheumatoid arthritis, MS, so many different things. And I think that it is such a overlooked aspect of our approach to healing. And I've seen so many patients that have that inflammatory um, excess, mast cell activation syndrome, POTS, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia. The list goes on and on. But I think, honestly, and it's been profound. What I've been practicing with lately and playing around with lately is the last couple of years is just the power of our voice, just the power, just not even vocalized, just the power of our thoughts to bring about some of that coherence that we're talking about. Light is a primary force, right? And I think all of us here understand when we're sick, it's really hard to use that internal voice to lead us out, right? It's sick, it's suffering, it needs something to get to the next stage. But I've also seen profound shifts with people. And I think you guys can relate when you see someone in front of you talking about their illness. There seems to be this reoccurring seed of um, I'm not safe, I'm not worthy, if only
Yeah.
this would happen. And so I have that person say that mantra to themselves. Sometimes I have them record it and they play it to themselves as they fall asleep, of whatever it is in their particular case. And that has been exceedingly successful. It's rather mind-blowing how successful just that is. Talking to ourselves can be that internal coherence conductor as well. And quantum biology covers all that, right? It
Mhm.
covers quantum effects of light, it covers sound, it covers EMF, it covers our thoughts and emotions as well, and the coherence that our internal emotional state takes. And so, I mean, I can talk about specific examples, but just all those conditions, right? All those different autoimmune conditions, um, psoriasis,
Yeah, yeah. I
rheumatoid.
did have a
Yeah.
little like side thought come up actually, because just
Yeah.
working with people myself, this is something that I notice a lot. They'll be going in and they'll look at like every little methylation thing in the book, every micronutrient in the book, and they'll be looking at like their own metabolic pathways very specifically and
Mhm.
thinking like surely it has to be one of those things. And then I'll look at their nutrition log and it's like McDonald's, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then I'll be like, what's your light environment like? And they're like, I'm out for 5 minutes and 10 minutes. And basically, all that to say, like, what would you say to that person to help them realize that they might need to kind of like shift their priorities in the overarching scheme of things?
That's a great question because that's a common thing that we see.
Many
nowadays.
such cases, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe my approach might sound a little weird, but it's been really successful for me, at least. What I like to do is when someone's first in front of me and they're talking about that, right? Their nutrition log we see is filled with McDonald's. They're outside 5, 10 minutes a day, all these different things. What I like to do is I like to kind of just shower them with the research. And one of the reasons I like to do this is I like to open up that window of awe within their mind. Because once they can get really excited about their biology and understand what a diet of McDonald's is going to do, what getting outside only 5 minutes can do, that they are a miracle and they are incredibly just absolutely incredible. The way the body works, the way it fits into this incredible world we live on. That's what I try to do with them. And I try to do it with research because a lot of people can rest their hat on that. They can feel safe, like, okay, yeah, this is research. I can go look it up. It's not just this weird lady talking about energy in front of me, right? Like I can start to like make some headway with the research. And then it's the awe, I think, that starts to turn them around. Like, oh, okay, I am incredible. And if I just connect to these incredible things and I treat my body like it is incredible, it's going to start changing. And so I'm going to do that. And so that's really where I start with my patients. They get a lot of like, well, then this happens, and then this happens, and this happens. And they start to get that experience of, wow, I am incredible. And maybe healing is maybe it's possible if I treat myself like I'm incredible.
Yeah, I really think the first hurdle that if you can help a client get over is one of empowerment, because I think
Yeah.
when you enter the system as someone dealing with mysterious symptoms, you get bombarded with this notion of like it's out of your control, it's not your fault, which it isn't, but it gives you this sort of sense of helplessness that you start to ideologically align with. And so for me, as someone that prior to developing Hashimoto's, partnered on that with you, and autoimmune neuropathy, I had gone through an eating disorder 5 years before that. And so I already sort of had a rough taste in my mouth with the traditional system and how they care for complex conditions or psychological mental illness like I had. And so I sort of immediately started to view the way I thought about things as one of the primary drivers of my demise, but also my way up the ladder again. And so I'm really glad you brought up that thought pattern, because it sounds too simple. My mom always used to say to me, like, you can choose to be happy. Happiness is a choice. And I used to be like, man, what a crock of crap. I used to like hate that she would say that to me. But once I sort of started to embrace the control that I actually do have of my life around me, and I like to tell clients now, think about how amazing it is that you can put your body through this much stress throughout your whole life until a symptom even starts. And so why
Yeah.
can't you work back from that? If your body's
Yeah.
that resilient up to like the final domino, there's no way you can't walk back from that. And so it's really
Yeah.
cool to show people that are also older in their 60s, 70s, show them a pathway forward too, because they're like, I've already gone through this life. It's too late for me. My heteroplasmy is too high, things like that. And there's a lot of room that can be done. One thing that you mentioned that kind of brings us back to the beginning of the conversation, but extends us into this idea of like overall coherence is water. And so I think it was Dr. Emoto that talks about how you can actually change the structure of water with your thoughts and influence through your psyche. And so you describe water not just as hydration, but as this active, intelligent component of healing and communication. And so just base question, what is structured water? Or as Gerald Pollack would say in his line of work, fourth phase water. He built a lot of work off Gilbert Ling, and there's quite a few scientists that are really into this and have sort of different takes on structured water. So I don't want to just say
Yeah.
Gilbert Ling is like the only one out there, or sorry, Gerald Pollack's the only one out there. But I'd love to hear your take in its place with this discussion of overall coherence and resonance.
Yeah, absolutely. Water is so incredible. I think we're just sort of scratching the surface with it. For so long, it's been this overlooked background. We can just ignore it. When you look at research and science, it's that ignored background, that solvent that doesn't mean anything. I think that a lot of medical approaches do the same thing when it comes to health. And what we're seeing with water, simply put, the way I see water, I see it as a bridge for all of this unseen information in the world, whether we're around us and inside of us, whether we're talking about light or sound or electromagnetic fields or the unified field, the 0 point field, whatever it is we're talking about, it is going through water and being amplified and being conducted and transmitted to those liquid crystalline structures in the body, whether we're talking about DNA, cell membranes, or fascia. So I see water as that conductor and amplifier. It can capture, it can store, it can transmit this frequency information that is occurring at all times all around us and inside of us. And you're right. There is a lot of debate about what structure this water takes. And I think that comes from the fact that water can take on so many different structures, right? Gerald Pollack is a friend and a mentor. He's an incredible researcher, and he posits that it takes on this hexagonal lattice shape when it comes up to hydrophilic surface, like our cell membrane, like our fascia. It takes on this honeycomb lattice formation, and it starts to build, and it builds that negative electrical charge, and it builds that positive water zone outside of it, that potential energy, just like a water battery. And I think that there's a lot to that. I mean, we could talk about the benzene ring and that just in that geometric structure, how the flow of energy and those free electrons is occurring. But I think when we start to get into it and we look at the research of people like Emilio del Giudice and Vidiano Giuseppe, looking at these different ways of looking at water, the quantum electrodynamic theory of water, and how water can take on many different structures. And basically, what we're looking at is just like if we were to look at the periodic table and we would see elements have a ground state and an electrical state or an excited state, right? We see the same thing with water. And we see that excited state changes the bonding in hydrogen. And that can be a water cluster formation, that can be the formation of this easy water around our cell membranes, these coherent domains that the QED theory talks about. Basically, we're all talking about water that has become excited, that has accepted and captured energy, is storing it, can then transmit it for biological action. And I think that we're, like I said, we're just scratching the surface. We don't know all of the different components. A pair of researchers that I really respect, Hans Giesink and Dirk Meijer, they are looking at the general music theory of the universe. And they've tested thousands and thousands of substances out there. And they found this harmonic ordering of the resonant frequencies of those substances, all of those frequencies, every one that they've tested for, whether it comes from clay or mitochondria or whatever it may be, they are all present in water. Water is that bridge, that amplifier, and I think that we are just starting to understand how important it is. And for me, a simple way for me to wrap my head around it is that bridge for frequency information in the body.
That is absolutely just so fascinating. And we're about to make it 1,000 times more fascinating. So, in addition to that, can we talk about just like how that works with like the role of the fascia in storing and conducting information, and especially in connection with water? And then I'm also curious about like How do fascia and like our intracellular water act as a communication matrix? And how can even things like trauma, inflammation, dehydration, even cellular dehydration from EMFs and all that, how can that block this network?
Yeah, that is a really important understanding of how things work. I think just on a very basic level, everybody in science and in the medical industry understands that water is the threshold for energy conduction. So the water that lines our proteins, if we're dehydrated, those proteins can't fold, they can't change conformation, and their geometric patterning, their conformation, is what dictates that cellular function. So that right there is just the backbone of our biology. We have to be hydrated. Then, when we extend it out to this understanding of excited water, energized water, liquid crystal water, structured water, this starts to look much different than how we were taught about the body. So we have this fascial web throughout our body, and it is made of connective tissue, which is mostly collagen. Collagen is semiconductive, so it can hold an electrical charge and it can transmit it. We also see that it is piezoelectric, just like a quartz crystal. When it is exposed to mechanical vibration, it can create an electrical charge. So we have this web of fascia that connects to every single structure in the body. It's semiconductive, it can create its own electrical charge, and it can hold it and transmit it. Now, this fascial web is also lined with this easy liquid crystal water, with this energized structured water. And so you start to see some incredible things happening in this network that spans our body. When we add the water to the fascia, not only is the fascia able to create an electrical current, hold it, and transmit it, but this water that lines it is, like we said before, it's building that negative electrical charge. There's that positive water that forms right outside of it, that potential energy from the separation of charge, just like in a 9-volt battery. That's happening inside living systems. And that negative electrical charge is so vital for our cellular function, whether we're talking about a cell in our brain or a cell in our fascia. But there's something more happening. This network, this fascial network that's covered with water, it is a reservoir, it's a repository of free electrons. And there's a way to look at the body where pain, inflammation, symptoms, disease state are a decrease in that negative electrical charge, meaning that we're gaining more positive charge. We're losing that valuable negative electrical charge. And when we look at the fascia, we have this web of semiconductive piezoelectric collagen lined with water that is a reservoir of free electrons that can transmit to areas where there is a deficiency in electrical charge or deficiency in electrons. So we have this incredible energy network. And then if you couple that with some of the research of Professor Gerald Pollack and his team out of the University of Washington, and they took collagen, a molded collagen tubule, and when we look at how fascia is produced in the body, we're used to thinking of that double helix of DNA, but our fascia is a triple helix. It forms really small tubules called tropocollagen nanotubules, just really small tubules of collagen. And they're lined with this liquid crystalline water. They form that water battery. And what he did was he molded a collagen tubule, placed it in water. That simulates the environment of our body, right? We're 60 to 70% water by weight, almost 98% if you count the molecules. Molecularly speaking, we're mostly water because the water molecule is so small. Placed that collagen tubule in water and exposed it to infrared energy. And immediately he saw that easy water, that liquid crystalline water start to form. It formed that water battery. But what was surprising was that it powered the flow of water, of fluid, of particles, of protons. Now, protons, we're used to thinking of electrons as energy, right? We plug our appliances into the wall, the electrons move, they power our appliances. That's where electricity comes from. The movement of protons also creates energy. I mean, the proton force motor was created almost a century ago. It's being now researched for an alternative form of energy. So when protons flow, we get energy as well. And we know from researchers like Nassim Haramein, a proton can hold an immense amount of information. So all of a sudden now, fascia isn't just the scaffolding, it is this water lined quantum communication network that is propelling fluids and particles and protons of energy and information. It's a repository of free electrons. It is able to conduct electrical charge. It takes on a completely new understanding. And some of the new research is forming this association that has been around forever anecdotally by body workers and healers and therapists, that our body holds trauma, it holds emotion. And we see from some of the latest research that there is this association. Different research studies looking at the trapezius, where there is stuck, dehydrated fascia. Trauma has caused an adhesion there, an obstacle to this flow that we're just talking about. And so there's that association. There's other research showing that when there is a myofascial release to that area, that those mental emotional symptoms of depression, anxiety, they start to subdue. They start to go away and resolve. And so I think we're understanding, I think it was last year, where we start seeing memory happening outside of neurons in the brain, right? Memory being held in cells outside of the brain. And I'm not talking about like muscle memory and repeated neurological pathways. I'm talking about memory genes in a cell outside of the brain. And so I think that when we put it together with all of these different things in the different receptors in the fascia, we see that fascia is the largest sensory organ. It has more sensory nerves than our muscles, and it seems to be responding first to some of these inputs before our brain, before our neurological system. So the new emerging research completely shifts our understanding from this simply scaffolding to this incredible network of information, of sensory input and output. It's incredible.
Yeah, you just laid out like this absolutely incredible picture of how the fascia work, how cellular water is connected with that, and it gets so deep. I'm sure that we could do like a 4 hour episode just talking about that alone. But I have like a burning question now. So what if somebody has like a disorder where they internally don't produce collagen well, like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome? How would that impact like that area of their physiology negatively? What would they be like kind of more predisposed to, and what could they do in like their day-to-day life to kind of compensate for that issue that they have going on in their physiology?
That's a great question. And that over and underproduction of collagen that we see in different conditions, there are several things that we can do. A lot of it is remembering that it's interconnected. And some of the neatest theories that I've seen floating around really talk about sort of the psycho-spiritual emotional components of having too much collagen, right? Too loose of collagen, too much fascia. And I think those are fascinating. But just from a very practical understanding, our fascia and our muscles are intimately connected. And so really regulating some of the interconnection. I mean, I didn't even mention about how interconnected our mitochondria are in our fascial network. They play a foundational role. It connects with our lymphatics, our immune system, and our muscles. And so remembering that these systems are circadian driven, we can support that with circadian biology and alignment, our mitochondrial health, supporting that relationship between the muscles and the fascia. There's a lot to be said. Again, I think some of the theories around this hyper production of collagen in the body is fascinating as a backdrop for more of this reception that we were just talking about, right? Being able to pick up on more of this energy in our environment. But from a very practical perspective, just tending to those interconnected relationships that we see, and we can talk about some of the things to avoid too, right? Some of the contaminants in our world and the glyphosate that is working against those collagen chains in those conditions, in every condition, in every fascial network, but those specifically. So really tending to those interconnections can be really helpful. When in the mainstream, there's not a lot of talk about help for that besides therapeutic interventions for cardiovascular issues or working on muscle strength. It doesn't really go beyond that. But when you look at it from a quantum biology perspective, tending to the mitochondria, tending to that relationship of water in the body, that interconnected field with the lymphatics and the immune system can be really important.
There's a lot of good points, and I think, like you, sort of where my frustration lies in the way we conduct like a conventional, whatever, clinical trial or any sort of research study around any topic is in such a binary point of view where you have to have a single variable of change and then a control, and then you sort of put the two matched against each other, and then you sort of measure a result based on those things, when you're saying intrinsically all these things are intimately tied together. There's things that affect everything all the time. And I think one of the easiest ways to just encompass that is to view like how light affects every system in the body, like that first light of the day systemically just travels down. But I think where it gets a little bit tricky, and I find this tricky with a lot of clients that I've had, and even in my own background, is the one systemic pattern, I think you mentioned this earlier, that I've seen across everybody, because there are sort of bio-individual needs. But one of the patterns I've seen is these histories of trauma, histories of psychological things, like being diagnosed with anxiety. Like fascia is very intrinsically tied with the way our nervous system reacts to stimulus. And like you said, while especially with things like Ehlers-Danlos, like we still view it as a very like structural view of fascia. It's like it's a structural component, which of course it is, but it's so much more than that. I would love to know, just with this trauma component of it, both personal and ancestral, there's these components of generational trauma. How does that imprint fascia? We talked about adhesions earlier and things like that. Like Stuck's point, like traps are very commonplace to have that, or like QLs in the lower back. There's that thoracolumbar fascia that runs all the way down the back that can be highly impacted with that. And we see that in people with systemic chronic back pain, but their MRIs look great, or they look like they shouldn't have any issues. That's where fascia and nervous system come into play. Have you found any therapies or modalities, or maybe like you said, I think it's more of a conjunction of the whole, that really bring that sort of like psychological aspect of trauma and the physical aspect of what trauma can do to fascial tissue and water memory together? Because I find that to be a real stuck point with people, that they know they have nervous system dysregulation, but they're like, it's so much more than just like a breathwork practice that works you out of that, or EMDR to work through trauma processing. It's about really creating this interconnected web. I'd love your take on that.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was first in practice, I saw a lot of combat veterans from the Iraq War, and they had significant trauma from that event, compounded with other traumas that we carry in life. And like you mentioned, generational traumas, and that generational trauma, just the output of cortisol that gets trained and passed down from generation to generation is going to impact that water network, right? People don't realize stress is really dehydrating. It's massively dehydrating to that water network inside of us. And so when you look at the ways that, like, what is memory? Where is memory stored in the body? We still don't know that, right? And there is that emerging field of research around water memory. And we know that there is this growing association between stuck adhered fascia, dehydrated fascia, and trauma, whether that be physical trauma or mental, emotional, psychological trauma as well. And so putting these two together, seeing that water has the capacity to hold memory, and then when we're doing fascial maneuvers, whether that's something we do with ourselves on our own, whether we go see a practitioner, we do myofascial release or Rolfing or cranial sacral, whatever it might be, when we are inducing that stretch, when we're inducing that pressure onto the fascia, it's bringing in the secretion of hyaluronic acid. So those fibroblasts in the fascia secrete hyaluronic acid. Hyaluronic acid is completely covered in this easy liquid crystal water. One research study put it at 1,600 water molecules around one molecule of hyaluronic acid. And again, how is that possible? Well, water molecules are really small, but the point is it's completely covered in this hydration shell. So when you're working with the fascia, you are allowing for new water to come into the fascia. And I teach practitioners and have a pretty strong subset of body workers. And when they pair their physical maneuvers with psychological mantras where the person is talking to themselves. I think we talked a little bit about when somebody has that kernel of, I don't feel safe, or I'm not worthy, or whatever it might be. When they're addressing that during a fascial maneuver, there's this phenomenon that happens where people come back week after week. Like it feels you did that maneuver and it felt good for a day or two, and now I'm back, right? When they pair it with that new psychological imprinting, that therapy is much more effective. And is it because it is imprinting that new water that's coming into that fascial adhesion? I mean, of course, I have zero research on this, but it's so fascinating to think that this water network has the potential, definitely, that we see with the research of Jacques Benveniste and Luc Montagnier and Masaru Emoto and now Veda Austin, this idea, and Rasmus Goop Berghausen. I mean, so many different researchers out there showing that water can hold information, and it can certainly be affected. Dean Radin has done incredible research in this area too, right? That our thoughts and emotions seem to impact the structure of water. And so pairing myofascial release, myofascial maneuvers, myofascial therapies with that psychological imprinting is such a fascinating pairing of the two. And it can't help but make me think that something's happening to that new water that's coming in with hyaluronic acid. Because anytime you do that maneuver, you are stimulating the fibroblasts to release hyaluronic acid and bring in that new water. And so, um, I think it's fascinating. And so many of these things, you guys, we're not talking about something we haven't done forever, right? What are the side effects of doing a fascial maneuver while you're thinking I'm safe? Right? We're not talking about adverse side effects that we can't possibly know about, right? We're talking about um, life affirming mantras and self talk. We're not talking about something really scary. So, what if it's not working by the water? What if it's not, all of these things? It doesn't matter. Telling yourself that you're safe and you're worthy isn't a area of medicine that I feel scared about the outcome or uncertain about the side effects, right? So I think so many of these things we talk about in quantum biology, the downside of humming or going outside in nature or telling yourself you're worthy or getting up in the morning and going to bed at night. Let's say all of this tomorrow we wake up and none of it's true. None of those things had bad effects to begin with. So we're in solid ground that we can feel really good about.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I think that in terms of any sort of intervention, you're always weighing like the cost, you're always weighing the opportunity cost of it and then the pros of it. And it feels like a lot of the time when it comes to something like a drug or something that you want to use, you have to really think like, okay, we know that there's negatives here, but do the positives outweigh the negatives? And with some of these more natural things like returning to nature, integrating yourself into your community,
Yeah,
well, if we're talking about side effects, they're probably going to be positive ones.
yeah.
So, very different story, but what would you say, like, if somebody is just getting into this and they're just super passionate about it and they're ready to go in, like, what are the non-negotiables that you should integrate into your life, whether it's a habit, a practice, or whatever it may be, to optimize things like our cellular water production, our fascia health, and how this overall interconnected system kind of works together?
Yeah, non-negotiables. And I think for me this looks different for people, right? So sometimes I have a patient in front of me, and if I were to tell them, okay, within the first half an hour of waking up, go outside barefoot and get the light in your eyes, they're going to be like, this person has not heard me. I am wheelchair bound, so there's different non-negotiables. I think the first one would be that self-talk. As soon as you wake up, as soon as you're falling asleep, that liminal space where there's only one voice in there. I don't know about you guys, but I run through my day with like 30 open tabs in my head, right? The grocery list and this, and I got to do this, and I got this, right? And so when I'm falling asleep or when I'm first waking up, there's just that one voice. And that's a powerful window for us to retrain our nervous system, for us to retrain our subconscious thought. So that would be my first non negotiable. And then, depending on the person, I would look at our relationship with nature. Are we getting in contact with the earth that we live on? And when we do that, we are immersed in the sights, the sounds of nature, the breath, the air that we get when we are breathing outside, the diversity of microbial inputs. A lot of people don't realize that the air we breathe has more impact on our gut microbiome than the food we eat. It's foundational, but that's not something a lot of us are thinking about. So when we are going outside, not only are we getting that light, when we're making contact, not only are we getting that exposure to that excitement, that infinite sea of electrons that are lining the earth, but we're getting the sights, the sound, the air. Our whole body goes, oh, yeah, okay. This is what we're doing. This is who I am as a human. So, those are my non negotiables, for sure, when it comes to health and repatterning some of the dysfunction we see in chronic disease these days.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was just on a walk today and I was sitting on a bench. There's like a nice harbor there, and I was like, this feels very right. And it was the same thing when I initially started healing too. The dude that I was talking to was like, you got to start with nature and you actually got to regulate yourself. He was a chiropractor, so he was very big on the nervous system, very big on fixing the nerves up here, all that stuff. But he's like, in addition to that, you got to get outside. You got to reconnect to nature because that's ultimately how you center yourself as a person. And a lot of those really good conversations that you'll have with yourself, they're often done outside rather than inside, I like to say.
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the nice thing about it is it just takes a step to get outside. You don't have to push yourself. There's nothing you have to do out there to activate it,
And
right?
it's free.
It's
Yeah,
it's
Yeah.
free. Yeah.
it's free.
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes back to a perception of like yourself as a being of nature and not just sort of this medium, smart ape or whatever that beat nature somehow. And now we're just so beyond nature that it's all about AI and blah, blah, blah. And that's sort of like, it's sort of this remembering, as people would say. And one thing I'm really excited about is, like you mentioned earlier, with things like biophotons, things with water, things with fascia, even though a lot of these foundations are built on science that has been done, man, sometimes 100 years ago, as far as like some of the biphoton stuff, like 50, 60 years ago, they're really just sort of revisiting it. And I'm really excited about hopefully where this might take us going forward. So I'd love to hear just sort of your predictive take on where you see the fields of quantum biology and somatic healing and biophoton research going in the coming years, because we're finding out new things all the time, and every time it just seems like we're living in a sci-fi movie, but the sci-fi is within our own body.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, we look at, the early quantum biology research. Now it's starting to focus on the human body, but all of that in the early 2000s for like 15 years, it was how do we replicate what's in this living system so we can use it for technology, right? Like we're the technology, we're the miracle looking for a miracle. And I think that what I get really excited about in the future is looking at that light communication in the body and looking at how our thoughts and emotions can activate that communication in the body. I also get really excited when I see what's happening with AI. You see it everywhere. I can't, my kids are good. I'm really good with the words. Like if you show me what someone has written, I can
Oh, I
tell
can
you
tell. I can
that's
tell. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, totally. And so I'm like, okay, I got that. But the pictures I can't. Like I'm like, oh, look at this. And they're like, that's AI. And I'm like, oh, I didn't notice that alligator had two tails. Or like, I'm just like, I'm not good at it. And it's getting better and better. But to me, it's exciting, not because what we're gonna gain from that expansion or advancement in AI, but where it's gonna push us. Because now when I go on social media and it's like all the pictures are AI, all the captions are, it's not this, it's that, it's this GPT driven content, and it just makes me want a human. It just makes me want to see a spelling mistake. It just makes me want to see something that is written by a human. I want a picture of a tree. And so I think that where we're at right now with AI, we've spent a few years being like, oh, is it going to overtake us? Is it smarter than us? But now I feel really hopeful that, oh, man, we don't realize that AI is a distorted image of us, of nature, and that it's maybe just pushing us to be human again. It's
That's exactly
pushing
right.
us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
So,
they want to take the image of God and they want to strip it away with their own little like counterfeit creation of it in a way. And
yeah.
like as society keeps progressing, what are we doing? We're increasing it from 5G to 6G. And the
Mhm.
actual outcomes on our health keep declining. And the way out of that is by pursuing nature. Like that's how you actually get out of that. And
Yeah.
by the time we hit 2040 and the EMFs are so bad to where everybody's sick and glued to their phone and has a disease, they're probably going to present something like, I don't know, like Neuralink or some sort of way of integrating yourself with the technology as a means of like actually resolving the issue that was caused by this disconnection from nature in the first place. So the big solution with it all is return to nature. Like that's what it's all about. And this is how you actually fight against the machine in a way too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's activating to do just that. Like the people aren't realizing that it's just creating this want to put down the phone, to go out. Like I feel that more and more now. Whereas a year ago, 2 years ago, it was like, oh, everybody has these AI images. And now it's like, oh, everybody just talks in AI. They even respond in comments that are made. You can't even just put a sentence down to the question, right? It's AI driven, and it's just forcing so many of us to want to be with a human, to want to be with a tree, to want to sit by a river, sit by the bay like you did today. And to me, that's really exciting because I didn't feel that 2 years ago. And I feel that now, this hunger for like, give me the real. I want the real. And so I'm excited about that for the future.
Yeah, I'm very excited to go back to shooting videos where I'm just like talking and my hands like kind of shaking a little bit, just like pure authenticity. I don't feel like I need to be like over edited or any of that stuff because that's personally what I've been craving. And I feel like I know we probably all felt it here making content over the last couple of years in the space of this chase of like we have to make it as perfect looking as possible. And now with AI making only perfect things, I think we'll see the craving in the opposite direction of like you said with spelling errors. I'm so bad with spelling. And I remember, man, my friend
Yeah.
Tristan would just get on my butt about spelling and captions because I would just like mess up words all the time. And now I'm just like, sometimes I'm just going to leave it just because I think people want to know that something's written by a human or like you're talking to a human. So I really have enjoyed this
Yeah.
conversation, Catherine. It's always a blessing to speak to you and see your work and see your videos pop up. And you have so many great resources for people. Is there anywhere that you would like to point anyone specifically right now that we can put in the show notes for anyone?
Yes. In fact, my new book just got
Oh, yay.
released.
Amazing.
Yeah. It's called Optimize, and it's 7 steps. It starts with water, and then it goes
Love it.
to the electrical capacity, light, nature, coherence in the body. It talks about the microbiome and mitochondria and immune system. And it's kind of interwoven with how this isn't new and emerging. We've always been talking about these things as humans, but that is now out. It's available at all major book retailers, and you
Amazing.
can find all of those at drcatherineclinton.com/optimize. And I'm offering some bonuses for anybody that orders the book. So that's all there and available if anybody's interested.
Amazing. Well, it looks like I'm headed to the bookstore right after this. And I think I couldn't have put a
Me
better
as
cap
well.
on this episode by saying, the way forward is often a reflection on the way back and actually maybe using history as a lesson as opposed to like a means to look back and criticize past behavior. And so hopefully everyone can glean from this episode not only feeling like they're in a holistic dynasty, but an ability to create your own holistic dynasty from here on out. So we'll see all of you in the next episode.